Hello and welcome to the Geeks Review. I'm Royce.
And I'm Joshua.
On today's show, we're going to try out a new format of review, Compare the Pair, where we take a look at an original movie and its remake and see how they measure up against each other. First episode, we're going to be taking a look at Total Recall, the 1990 original starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the 2012 remake starring Colin Farrell. Based on the Philip K. Dick story, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, the three stories share the same basic setup, but vary differently in overall plots. Set in the near future, a man dissatisfied with life goes to a company called Recall to be given implanted memories of a life as a super spy, only to get there and discover they might actually be real. The 1990 original was set in a world where Earth's empire has expanded beyond the stars, where there's a colony on Mars and there's political turmoil, whereas the 2012 one is set exclusively on Earth, where most of Europe is basically one large...
It's the United Federation of Britain and
the colonies.
And the colony, which is just Australia, because the rest of the world has been devastated by viral warfare.
And these two countries are connected by a tunnel that runs through the centre of the Earth.
Called the Fall.
So, have you ever seen these movies before?
I had seen them before, but in the reverse order. I had seen the remake.
Oh, okay.
When I was living with my old man and we had Old Star. And then only a couple of years ago did I actually peruse the original.
That's quite a different experience then to sort of have that foreknowledge of the remake before the original, because watching the original first, going into the remake, it sort of felt like a bit like, oh, okay, here we go again.
Yeah.
Did you get that feeling in reverse order, or what were your impressions?
Up until, watching the remake, it was a lot more like, oh, this is interesting. I have no idea what's going on, but this is interesting. And then watching the original, it was a bit more to the point.
Yes.
They still were films of political turmoil, but the motivations were a lot more different. And the stories themselves are similar, but not. They're same, but different.
It's the same sort of setup, it's the same general premise, but...
Same characters to a degree.
It begins with Quaid, known as Quail,
Quaid.
in the original story. Quaid is dissatisfied, and he keeps having...
It's a recurring dream of him with a woman.
And in some sort of scenario... The first one, I feel, the original, is a lot more dreamscape-like. I mean, he dreams that he's on Mars with this woman, and he falls down and breaks his visor and chokes to death, and, the lack of atmosphere. Whereas the remake begins with this very sort of intensive action scene. Very intensive to the point where it sort of loses all dream quality, I believe.
Yes.
So...
I believe the remake does a bit better when it comes to trying to blur the line between fiction and reality.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it does a little bit better, even though it itself looks generic as hell when it comes to a sci-fi world.
Yeah, I mean, the original one is very distinct. I believe it was filmed in Mexico City. Lots of sort of modernist, brutalist architecture on Earth, and you travel to Mars later on in that film. It is completely different. It feels very off-world, very sort of like...
Truly alien.
Cobbled together.
The lack of CG also helps it quite a bit. Well, with this one, you could easily look at and say, oh... That's Blade Runner. No, that's actually Total Recall.
Yeah, it's like, it's cyberpunk, it's Blade Runner.
Yeah, it's trying to fit into that generic science fiction. This is the future!
Yeah, there's little to no distinction. They're both very busy landscapes in the new one. Like, I mean, apart from palette swap, like the colony is all sort of greenish.
More greens and greys with a little bit of brown, while the United Federation of Britain, or the UFB, is more chromatic and silver.
Yeah, with like blue skies, which are a lot more evident, but even so, they're just very busy visually, and it's sort of difficult to tell them apart.
Yeah. Well, besides
that.
Well, the original is very, you can tell where you are.
Come to think of it, the original doesn't really give you an idea of what's beyond the city walls.
No.
There's no like landscapes, there's nothing like that.
It's more contained than this one.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, not this one, the remake, I should say.
The remake, yeah. So, that's the setup. He thinks of something in Mars. And one thing that actually annoyed me about the remake is it begins with, like, the text. The exposition dump text.
Oh, yes, this is what you need to know.
Yeah, it is lazy. A bit. Especially when the original sort of throws you into it.
And it fills in the blanks along the way.
Yeah, it does sort of stop and tell you what's going on. Like, both films kind of have a moment where you're introduced to the concept of recall, the company that gives you these implanted memories, and you can sort of, have these... Well, yeah, it's an interesting concept.
It is a very interesting concept.
But there's both moments in those films where it sort of stops and it's like very evidently like, here's an advert for this product that the character needs to pay attention to that will be the seed that plants the idea, in his mind and germinates into that. But I feel like the original sort of gets away with it a lot more because of the way it's framed.
It is. I mean, it's... They both see the ad on a train, I'm pretty sure.
I think so, yeah. In the remake, I remember he stops in the street and sees it.
Yeah.
But yeah, recall, they implant you with fake memories of, a holiday or an experience. Which
an
is
ego trip and something that you want to do.
It's an interesting concept, that. I mean, how would you feel if you didn't instead get to experience, a trip, but just had the memories of it?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the memories last, but...
It's the experience and the feelings that you get from it.
Yeah.
And that's really where these films sort of try and present the original story of, we can make you remember wholesale of, is it real or is it just his experience at the recall?
I feel like the line was a lot more blurred in the original film.
It definitely was easier to try and distinguish between the two, while the second one kind of pedestals Quaid a bit more with the Hauser side.
Yeah, with the original, I felt like he goes to recall, he gets told what the deal is. We cut away from him, and then when we come back, he's about to undergo the procedure, and he's already screaming about, this supposed,
They've blown his cover.
Yeah, this supposed lifestyle which he's choosing, this memory that he's chosen for himself. And you kind of have this dawning realization as the techs realize, like, oh my God, we've, not even implanted with him anything. We've uncovered something that was buried.
Yes.
And they send him on his way. Whereas the remake is sort of like, he gets there and John Cho, tells him some stuff and then kind of realizes like, oh, you've already got suppressed memories. You're a spy already. And then they immediately get killed. And it sort of leaps into an action scene almost immediately.
It's definitely more on the go.
Yeah. You get to like the point of about 70 minutes into the original film by about the 30 minute mark of the remake. Like the whole 2 weeks scene, you kind of got a cameo of this woman in a new one, and it's like obviously diverting your attention away. It's interesting because it does show you before this disguise that Quaid uses.
Yes,
like
the hollow neck.
Yeah, and it does show like the actual face that he uses, and then when you see the guy there, you're like, oh, it's Quaid. Whereas the original is a lot more like, oh, why are we now looking at this lady? Oh, it's
Quaid. And the effects, the practical effects are phenomenal in the original. That's what it makes it stick out the most, because as we said before, well, as I had pointed out before, the remake, it's very bland and generic looking.
It is, but I feel like it's very solid effect-wise. Like, I didn't look at anything and go like, that looks garish, that looks fake, it's like, I look at it and go like, that's obviously CGI, but it does look convincing enough that I can.
It doesn't have its own uniqueness to it.
Yeah, well, the original uses a lot of, especially fake heads.
Yes, fake heads, practical looks.
It's quite heavy on the body horror element as well. I mean, Quaid discovers he's got like a tracker and it's embedded in his head, and he sticks this device up his nose, and it pulls out like this sort of
golf ball sized tracking device
from his nose. The effect, the way they do that is really clever. They've gone and got like this fake Arnold Schwarzenegger head, which looks incredibly realistic, and it's only if it's pointed out to you that it's fake do you really realize as he pulls this thing from his nose. And the remake has him just pull it out of his hand.
Yeah, because it's the phone.
Right, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Right, okay, that makes sense now.
Because they're tracking his phone.
Because
Quaid Banchant's character was going, when he get his phone back on the grid, get his phone back on the grid, blah, 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 blah.
That makes sense now. That's sort of one of those things where it's like, oh, well, modern technology has reached us at this point, so we should implement this bit of modern tech into a more futuristic way. One thing that stood out to me was this Casio-branded tracker, which they were using in the original. And it's this sort of speed gun sized and shaped object, and it's just a big block, and now you could do that all on your phone. Hey,
pretty much.
It's I do appreciate that sort of heavy tech vibe you've got from the original, but yeah, it's just severely lacking in blood, gore, body horror, the new one.
Yes.
And like I said, it is just so generic I mean, talking about Quaid himself,
Yeah.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, Colin Farrell. I think Arnold's quite a good actor.
I rooted for Arnold more.
Yeah.
Even if he did action it up a bit towards the end there.
It does get very, like, Terminator, Predator, Commando, where he's just there sort of firing rounds into people and there's blood going everywhere. It's... But yeah, I found him more compelling.
Yeah, he's not just... I hate to use this expression, but he's... Colin Farrell, I love him as an actor. He's done great stuff in the past, but here he feels like Matt Damon in The Happening. What? Does. I'm Hauser? What? No, I'm Douglas Quaid.
Pretty much, yeah. It is just one of those generic roles, whereas with Arnold, it feels like he's actually the dude.
Yeah, it's like I believed him more as Hauser, trying to convince him that he's a good guy. While here in the original, you can almost definitely tell that Hauser and Quaid are two different people.
Yeah, you can. Whereas you don't really get that sense with Quaid in the Colin Farrell film.
No.
I mean, it's sort of tricky because watching the two films with essentially the same plot in the same day that are visually distinct but not distinct enough. Like we keep saying, the remake is generic, and it's so generic. I'm just left with the plot, as opposed to like the visual. The plot experience
of the remake is a bit more intriguing, I'm going to say, because they're not doing it because capitalism. They're doing it because the United Federation is running out of room for its population. It's running out of places to put people. So because people can't afford a trip to Mars, because they do mention Mars, the entire remake is Earthbound. They decide we're going to need to find a way to justify invading the colony again and wipe out its citizenry and push them out so we can move our civilians into that area.
Yeah.
Well, the original was more, there's dissidents on Mars fighting the big bad corporation.
It's the original was directed by Paul Verhoeven, who has directed other sort of sci-fi dystopias such as, Starship Troopers and RoboCop and Showgirls.
Yeah.
So it's very in line with that sort of mega corporation vibe, especially, with the Predator movies, the Alien movies. Around the same time, it was all like mega corporations.
The Predator film itself was more about big army.
Yeah.
The CIA Secret Service type of deal, not keeping the grunt in the black, while the Alien films was more the corporation.
Yeah, that's true. So
it didn't really become... No, actually, no. It just... Predator actually just stayed the government, the Secret Service, until...
in the jungle. And concrete
the
jungle.
City. And then...
didn't really get the whole political angle until the aliens came into the mix, yeah.
Yeah. Because then it was just, the two crossovers, and the only reason why the Weyland Yutari was there was because, they wanted to study the Xenomorphs.
I will say they misused, or underused, Bill Nye in the remake as well.
He's criminally underused along with Bryan Cranston.
Yeah, wearing a very obvious wig because this was like peak Breaking Bad time.
And surprisingly, a lot of the members of the United Federation of Britain don't sound very British.
Yeah, it's very American, hey? Like, I mean, even Colin Farrell himself, who's Irish, is just putting on his American accent, hey?
Yeah, there's a lot of Yanks for a British Federation there.
Who are the two ladies in that? It's Kate Beckinsale.
Kate Beckinsale,
and Jessica Biel.
Yes.
Who, to me, I mean, like, people like them, they're perfectly fine, but in my head, always they've sort of just been like the same kind of actress. Whereas in the original, I mean, you got Sharon Stone, and I don't know the other actress, but they're not only visually distinct.
They're more different character and personality wise.
Yeah.
Melissa, or is it Melina? One of the two.
Melina. Yep.
Melina. She works at a strip joint, and while working for the Resistance, Sharon Stone works for the agency, and pretty much they're distinct. Sharon is able to put on the loving wife act to try and trick Quaid, and Melina is definitely like, I don't even know who you are anymore. While the remake, Kate Beckinsale does kind of well as the wife.
Yeah.
But kind of devolves a bit more, while Jessica Biel, it's just...
She's kind of unremarkable.
Yeah, she's there.
Yeah, and
She's the House's love interest, and that's it.
yeah, with Kate Beckinsale's character, she's definitely like a combination of the Sharon Stone, but also Michael Ironside character.
Yes.
But then Bryan Cranston's character is also like
Michael Ironside's character.
with the other what's his name? You know, the big boss of the corporation. That's interesting, I guess, but to sort of give her a more active role, and audibly she's distinct, like she's got the American accent, and then when she reveals herself to be evil, she's suddenly British.
Yes. There are British people in the British Union.
It's not as well done, that side of thing, and I just wasn't as interested or invested. And with Quaid himself, there is like less time. There's also less time to breathe in the remake as well.
Yes, it's just go.
Yeah. I really just remember that scene in the original when he finally stops after being chased for so long. And he sits down and he sees a message from himself, sort of instructing him on all this stuff and experimenting with the technology. I mean, both these films have holograms as well.
Yeah, but they're underutilized.
Yeah. With the original, I mean, when the hologram comes back into it, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I remember that from earlier. And then, gosh, I also had a thing with both these films where I reached a point where I'm kind of like, okay, well, we're only 70 minutes in and this stuff is happening. What's the rest of the 40 minutes going to be on this? And it's a lot of action.
Yes.
A lot of action. And a few bits stood out to me, like, you know, Michael Ironside's death, which is quite gruesome.
See you at the party, Victor.
Whereas the remake, it's sort of like, okay, well, we're 50 minutes into this movie. There's an hour left.
The only real stopping point that they have is when they reach Quaid's apartment. Well, House's apartment, I should say.
Yeah, that was a nice bit of... That was different.
Mm.
It was framed differently, yeah, but it was essentially served the same sort of purpose, but in a more visually distinct way, which it needed more of to be.
There was more of a mystery in the original. Like trying to put the pieces together on who Hauser was and what his story is. While this one, it kind of just points out. Well, it pretty much points it out to you in the text crawl at the beginning. Hauser betrayed the corporation.
You kind of got a moment in the original where he's on Mars, he's with Melina.
Get your ass to Mars. Sorry.
Yeah. There's a knock at the door, and it's a guy from Recall, and he says, you know, you've been having
a psychotic break.
And we won't spoil what happens.
No, it is a phenomenal scene.
It is.
I know the one you're talking about now.
Yeah. But it's kind of... The first one is really about, you know, doubting what's real.
Yeah, it's about fake. Trying to sell you the mystery of, is it in his head or is this happening?
Yeah.
Well, the remake is a bit more trying to sell you, yes, this is reality.
Yeah, because when you have a similar scene with his friend, played by Bokeem Woodbine from Fargo Series 2, great actor. Yeah. In this, it's just the framing of it, because in the original, it's Quaid alone in his apartment with Melina, and
the doctor shows up.
He's been dreaming of Melina for like we've been established since the very first scene. He's been dreaming of Melina, and she's there, and the doctor shows up and tells him this is not real, and that unfolds from there. Whereas with this, it's in a public, you know, it's in like a foyer of like a hotel or something. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of people watching. There's police. There's his friend. There's Melina or Jessica Biel's character there. It's a bit less intimate.
Yeah.
And a bit vague. It is a longer scene, it feels like.
It drags out a bit more, and it makes it, definitely a lot harder to actually believe.
And when the reveal comes in the original, it's a lot more obvious.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, it really draws your attention to the fact of like, well, this is what's going on. And you understand where Quaid's head is at. Whereas with this, Quaid just makes a decision which sort of seems like, well, it happens in the original, so it might as well happen here.
Yeah, and there's no real tell.
Yeah. What else stood out to you?
Really want to go more on the style of it. It looks like, I want to elaborate more on, you know, silent substance. Like, the original is picturesque. It's beautiful. It's daunting to look at, and you can definitely tell you're in different locations, where when you're in the colony and then you're up in the UFB, there's really no dissimilance other than you're on the surface in the UFB and you're actually on the ground in the colony.
Yeah, the world of the first film on Earth is very oppressive. You know, it's all concrete. It's all like modern.
It's all greys and that, but you can tell that he's in a different location each time.
What impresses
with the exception of the highway when he's in the Johnny Cab.
Yeah. What impresses me actually with the original is just how vast it was, because it was shot on location, I believe in Mexico City. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
But it was filmed in Mexico, I know that
Well,
much.
the remake was filmed here in Australia.
Ah, right. But just all on green screens.
Hey, good old Sydney screens.
But yeah, it's just seeing this massive real location. It's a real city, and it's really built to be a place where people live and commute and all that. And just hundreds, if not thousands of extras. Whereas, you know, I guess in the remake, I mean, I was saying only a second before.
There's plenty of extras, but they're kind of just
they're just there. It doesn't feel like it's a real lived-in space.
No.
Even though they try as hard as they can to make it feel so. It just misses the mark.
I feel that with some cases, remakes do add more, which does make the film better. Where here, the betrayal definitely stings a bit more.
Yeah.
And then it's completely undercut.
Well, with Sharon Stone, I mean, playing his wife.
Yeah.
And he sort of starts to suspect that he's a spy. He's killed some people already. It's sort of... It's funny. Arnold Schwarzenegger just feels like he blends in more than Colin Farrell does. And he's Arnold Schwarzenegger.
The initial moment where he's like, I've killed people at recall. How do we explain this, dear?
Yeah.
And then it all turns around.
Well, in that scene, he steps away, and he steps out, and the apartment is dark, and someone's shooting at him, and you don't know exactly what's going on.
No.
But then you find out it's his wife. It's his wife that's been shooting at him, and she spills the beans. They kind of have a moment of quiet where they sort of sit there and go like, "Hey, you know, old time's sake, why don't you?" It's very just it's iconic, you know. It just sticks in your mind.
In the original, yeah.
But then in the new one, I know she's like a super soldier, but she seriously tries to strangle him while hugging him, and that obviously does not go well.
No.
And I mean, you kind of got new sort of new camera technology, new camera, you know, like ways of filming, ways of doing special effects and fight scenes and choreography and framing it, and it does feel more real, but it just doesn't have that same impact. And they don't have a moment where she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, you know,
it's a job, but I just work here."
Because it then makes the whole, you know, this isn't real, here's your wife, in the remake just feels less sincere. It doesn't feel believable at all. And then in the original, it feels like it could be true because she's sort of left a bit vague and she's been off screen for so long, and she comes back.
Instead of just being a primary antagonist.
Yeah.
Filling in Michael Ironside's Richter role.
Yeah, he's great.
I love Michael Ironside in nearly everything.
Yeah.
He's what made Starship Troopers for me, and it's what made Total Recall for me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Paul Verhoeven knows how to pick him. It's so wacky and zany as well. I actually found out a few days ago that Paul Verhoeven was considered by George Lucas to direct Return of the Jedi.
That would have been a very different film.
It would have been so. If not Paul Verhoeven, David Lynch was also approached.
That would have been a radically more different film again.
I mean, Return of the Jedi is great, and all that. But yeah, it really feels like this is kind of his Star Wars in a way.
Yeah.
Paul Verhoeven's Star Wars.
So Paul Verhoeven's Star Wars. But yeah, I think the original is a superior product. I like the remake. It's a good romp, but it's, with its story at least, being radically different.
Well, it was your first experience with this story, hey?
Mm.
And when you did go back to watch the original, did you sort of find yourself then falling into those traps in like doubting, you know, the nature of reality and the story?
Like when I first watched the remake, I definitely felt it harder to believe the trap memory, you know, trying to figure out, like, I did fall for it, but watching the original, it's a lot more easier set up because you walk into it willingly and then you kind of start going, Oh, crap. Though I do love the Funhouse Mirror with Schwarzenegger talking with Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
I'm you. Not...
It's one of those films for me where you can just sort of put it on late at night and just have a good time, if you're into that sort of
Either
thing.
with both films, really.
It falls into that same sort of category for me as like Demolition Man.
Perfect example.
To the point that I actually got confused both times I rewatched both films, and I'm like, oh, is Dennis Leary going to show up now? Oh no, wait, that's in Demolition Man. And I'm like, wait, what's he doing here? Yeah, Sylvester Stallone's Total Recall. What do you think of that?
That would have been an interesting watch.
Or how about Demolition Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger? It feels, I don't know.
It wouldn't be the same.
Nah.
It wouldn't be the same.
Nah.
I think I believe Schwarzenegger is a Russian cop more than I believe him as a US police officer. Cocaine.
How about Copland with Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Yeah.
Anyway, this has been the Geeks Review, Compare the Pair, where we took a look at Total Recall, the 1990 original starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and the 2012 remake starring Colin Farrell.
Oh, wow.
Colin Farrell. And the 2012 remake starring Colin Farrell. We'll be back next week with a review of Cruella, the new Disney live-action film, which is itself a remake, in a sense.
It's the new Maleficent.
Maleficent, yeah, it is. Anyway, we'll be back next week to discuss that and maybe talk a little bit about Disney remakes. Anyway, I'm Royce.
And I'm Joshua.
And we'll see you next time. Bye for now.